Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thanks so much for joining the session. It's 11:30, so we'll start, kick stuff off here. My name is Jeff Paley. I'm a partner here at the Bonadio Group. Welcome to the session. We're happy to have you here. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items. The first one relates to those of you who are wishing to get continuing professional education credit for the session. At the top of your screen, there's a button called Conferences IO. You want to click on that, put in your name and your email address, and it will get you logged in there so that when the survey questions come up, you'll be able to answer those, which will qualify you for the CPE credit for this session today. We're very happy to have Joe Tarshish here today. He's going to walk us through some of the materials on the IIA's new quality standards. I hope that you can all hear me, and you'll hear Joe in just a minute. If you're having any problems with the technology, please enter in the chat related to what those are. We have folks standing by to answer those questions. And as we go through the session, if you have any questions about the material or about the topic, please enter those into the chat as well. We'll be monitoring those continuously. We may not answer them all the instant that you put them in there, but we will be aware of those. We'll try to answer those as we go through the session or at the end. And if we can't, then we'll get some information out after the session related to those questions. Again, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Oh, there's the steps for CPE. Hopefully what I just said is consistent with what's on this slide. I think it is. And hopefully the Conferences IO interface, when you click on that button, will be relatively easy to follow. And then on the next slide, we get into the materials. I'm going to turn it over to Joe. And Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Joe Tarshish. I'm an internal audit and risk management practitioner with over 20 years of experience. I provide advisory services to corporations of various sizes. I specialize in risk assessment, controls design, and internal audit solutions. I'm a certified internal auditor, CIA. I served as CFO of a publicly listed startup. I've held senior audit roles at Citibank, Millennium Partners, and Ernst & Young, where I led global audit teams and enhanced risk and control frameworks. I work with clients hands-on to share my experience in internal audit methodology development and quality assurance. These are two areas I'm passionate about, and I'm very excited to discuss them with you today. So, jumping right in January of this year, the IIA released the new Global Internal Audit Standards. I'm sorry, they were released last year. They came into effect this year. So there was a one-year period between the release and the effective date of January of this year. So a couple things you may be thinking about under the standards. A big impact is in terms of quality assurance and improvement, which is an important area that we're going to talk about. And also, whether you're planning on complying with the standards through an external quality assessment or self-assessment with independent validation, we'll have some thoughts to consider as you're going through that decision process. So when we talk about quality assurance, we're really, ideally reaching for this holistic, in-depth approach. And so here's a challenge. Have you considered next steps beyond compliance with the external review requirement? Are you leveraging your alignment with the standards as an opportunity to think more holistically about how you can achieve and maintain continuous improvement through your quality assurance efforts? So let's talk about several ways we can help you to both broaden and deepen your quality assurance impact on your internal audit department. And we'll talk about three aspects that sort of feed into one another. The internal audit quality assurance universe involves ongoing monitoring, so real-time monitoring of your IA activities to ensure adherence to regulatory requirements, internal methodology, the global internal audit standards, and best practices. Supporting that, it's professional practices advisory. It's a function within your IA department focused on standards compliance. This group provides guidance to align your internal audit department with regulatory and professional standards, such as those issued by the IIA. And it helps to establish practices and provide training so your IA function can meet or exceed global audit standards for or audit excellence. And then we'll talk about how these efforts lead to continuous improvement through a unified approach, designing and executing your quality assurance and professional practices framework so that your efforts run smoothly and support continuous improvement to drive value through your audit activities. Let's take a very quick look at the standards. You can find them on the IAA website. We'll look at them briefly. But the way the standards are organized, it's just worth talking about that a little bit. There are 5 domains. Under the 5 domains, there are 15 principles, and within the 15 principles are 52 standards. Don't have to memorize that, and these are available on the IA website. But I just want to talk briefly in terms of a high-level overview. Domain 1 is the purpose of internal auditing. Domain 2 is ethics and professionalism. Domain 3 is governance of the internal audit function. Domain 4 is managing the internal audit function. And Domain 5 is performing internal audit services. And so here we're going to talk a little bit about aspects of Domain 3 and Domain 4 that are focused on quality. And so we'll get into these. And for the most part, Domain 3, within Domain 3, we'll find Principle 8, which focuses a little bit more on the external quality assessment that we're talking about, and then Principle 12, which focuses on the ongoing internal assessments. So let's talk through those briefly. We'll take a quick look, and then you can feel free to look at these in depth on the IAA website. So Principle 8 basically says that the board oversees the internal audit function, and quality assessments and quality assurance are two-way communication between IA and the board, also between IA and management with respect to the activities and performance of the internal audit department. Standard 8.3 under Principle 8 gets into quality requirements. And then you see referenced here 8.4 external quality assessments and standard 12.1 internal quality assessments. And we'll look at 12 soon. Here's 8.4 on the external assessments that we're talking about. And Principle 12 is about enhancing quality. This is a continuous effort, and it's done through external assessments, but much more frequently on an ongoing basis through internal assessments and continuous improvement. So standard 12.1 talks about the internal quality assessments that an IA department does. And we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll get into the meaning of these principles and standards. So now that we've gone through kind of the IA requirements, so let's talk about how to implement them. There are multiple solutions to help you to comply with the requirements for a quality assessment. And here we're talking about the external assessment. So there's a readiness review that is basically a gap assessment. And we'll talk about that, an external assessment and a self-assessment with external or independent validation. A readiness review is something that will help you to prepare for an external quality assessment by performing a preliminary evaluation. So if you're not sure where you stand with respect to the standards, this is a step you may want to take. Typically, you bring in an outside resource to do this. We'll recommend enhancements to improve conformance with the standards, organizational governance, and contributions to organizational objectives to ensure readiness for a comprehensive external review, which could follow within a year, or if you need a little bit more time to address gaps, you would schedule your external assessment for sometime down the road. The external assessment requirement could be accomplished 2 different ways. The first is fully external assessments. So you bring in independent assessors who are certified internal auditors to perform an external quality assurance review to verify that your internal audit functions conformance with the standards, and to verify your alignment with organizational governance, the contribution of the IA function to achieving organizational objectives and stakeholder expectations. The assessors will perform interviews with key stakeholders And they'll, in their reporting, incorporate benchmarking against leading practices to compare your internal audit practices against industry peers to identify gaps and improvement opportunities. So it's actually a key deliverable, the benchmarking. Another way to do this is you may say, I'll do it internally. And so that's a self-assessment with an independent validation. So when you do your self-assessment, you bring in a CIA to validate the assessment that you did. So first, you perform that assessment. It's a thorough, documented internal review to determine your department's conformance with the standards. It's going to include, as with an external assessment, interviews with stakeholders, benchmarking against leading practices, and then the results are independently validated by qualified assessors who determine that the review was conducted completely and accurately. We're up to our first polling question here, and we'll give you a moment.
Sean, did you launch the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. So, Joe, while we have a break, while people are answering the question, that we have one question that's been submitted here. It says, my institution is very small. We have one person in an internal audit role, and that person is stretched thin. Is it really practical to address the quality standards in a meaningful fashion?
That's a really good question. I'm glad someone raised it. You know, really half of IA departments are small. So it's really defined as having between 1 and 5 members. That's like a small audit shop. The IA standards are designed to be applied with an eye towards both the risk of your organization and the resources of your IA department. So concerning the quality assessment, a small department may want to consider outsourcing at least a minimal level of quality assurance work. Any other? Okay, we're just about done, I think, with the polling question as the results are coming in. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So, Joe, the results are that we have about 50% say that they don't recall that they've ever done this before.
We have a great audience. Then this is perfectly suited to, to at least half of you and hopefully the other half as well, because, as we go through the slides, we'll hopefully have some ideas that you could start thinking about as you focus on your next quality assessment. Okay, I think we'll move on from here. We'll talk in a bit of detail about the readiness review, external assessment, self-assessment with independent validation. You prepare for your readiness review. Sorry. Okay, covered that. Sorry. Okay. Let's talk about your internal audit quality assurance review. When we talk about quality assurance, we're talking about both principles 8 and 12, and we're talking about both the external review that you do on a periodic basis, be every 5 years, and the internal reviews that you do on an ongoing basis. So it's your annual reviews, annual self-assessments, your ongoing reviews, and we'll talk about those. So the key point is you're going for an objective evaluation. You want to conduct a comprehensive quality assurance review, evaluating the IA function's efficiency, effectiveness, and adherence to standards. The QA process not only assesses current practices, but also provides actionable recommendations tailored to your department's unique goals and challenges. And let's talk about benchmarking and best practices. To identify areas for improvement, you would use industry benchmarks, and this will help you to ensure your audit team operates in line with leading practices and emerging trends. Professional practices advisory is that other supporting function we talk about that helps your IA function to do what it does as best as it can. So there's standards compliance. It offers, it develops methodology and offers guidance to align with your IA department with regulatory and professional standards, such as those issued by the IIA. helping you to establish practices that meet or exceed global standards for audit excellence. And then risk assessment and control evaluation supports your IA team in refining your approach to risk assessments and control evaluations, which is really the bread and butter of what we do as auditors, ensuring a robust framework that enhances risk management and operational efficiency. And we'll talk about how these efforts, the QA and professional practices, feed into continuous improvement, achieved through customized training and development. So tailored training programs to equip your team with the skills and knowledge to address evolving risk and regulations. Upskilling is always important. We can all always benefit from new skills and areas of knowledge. And this is all about providing your audit team with the skills and knowledge that it needs to do its work as best as it can to develop excellent risk assessments, to execute great audit programs and to deliver value and insights to the organization. Process optimization. And here again, this is about the continuous monitoring and periodic assessment, which will help IA departments establish frameworks that foster adaptability, which is key. Things are always changing within our organizations, and we have to change with them as auditors. Efficiency and value generation across the organization. So let's talk about the continuous improvement cycle. And we're exploring the relationship between quality assurance, QA activities, and professional practices, which serves as a foundation for achieving continuous improvement within your IA department. This dynamic creates a positive feedback loop where insights and outcomes from QA activities directly inform and refine professional practices, which in turn drive further advancements in audit quality and organizational value. So in this very simple pictorial, we have in the middle continuous improvement in that circle there. And how's that achieved? We have our internal audit activities are ongoing. Quality assurance reviews those activities, and then that helps inform professional practices, which develops and enhances a methodology, which then further supports internal audit activities. So we're achieving through this relationship continuous improvement. This is a bit of a complicated little pictorial, which looks at the various aspects within the continuous improvement cycle, but we'll kind of magnify different parts of this and talk about them. Hopefully you can see this better. We're looking more closely here at the internal audit activities. This is a list which is not comprehensive, which is an attempt to kind of enumerate some of the many things an IA department does. So starting with the audit universe development, deciding coverage, periodic risk assessments of the audit universe and audit entities, continuous auditing, which is really key, and then audits of all types, full scope audits, targeted special projects, and then advisory engagements, which is really taking up an increasing amount of our time as management is coming to us and asking for help with things. So it could be a readiness review that, management is implementing a new system. They want to know if they're ready to go for go live, for example, and other aspects of the internal audit activities, issue validation, as we go through our audits or issues, there are regulatory issues that we face, and audit is tasked with validating whether those are closed. Retrospective reviews, let's say there's a regulatory issue that comes in. Many organizations have a practice and a policy where audit will then look at what happened, what went wrong, looking at the root cause. Could we have had some practice or approach which would have prevented this regulatory issue? Requests from regulators, supporting regulators during their exams, audit committee reporting, Sarbanes-Oxley testing, if that resides within audit, post-audit survey, which is really critical to understand the perception management has of the quality that audit is delivering, and then process improvement that audit is always doing. Okay, now we'll look at the next aspect, which is quality assurance. And here, we'll talk a lot about internal quality reviews, and the external quality reviews take a look at this as well on a periodic basis. So within the quality assurance or QA universe, we have many of the same aspects that we covered under internal audit activities. It is reviewing the work of audit. So I'm not going to read all of these. We've looked at these, but a few things worth pointing out. Very often a QA function will work on what's called a hot review. They say audit is going through a particularly high-risk audit now, and we're going to look at that audit as it's happening rather than after the fact. And we'll look at the steps of the audit and deliverables as they're being created. And we'll have, milestones, and we'll have meetings throughout to understand the quality as the work is being done. So it's sort of like, QAs in the kitchen as the audit is being prepared. A couple examples: if you're, a hospital, so maybe patient services would be considered a high-risk review, and audit QA may take the opportunity to do a hot review of that area. What's worth calling out here, QA does look at SOX. If you have SOX within audit, are you optimizing the work that SOX does to avoid duplication and overlap? Of course, the external quality assurance reviews, the internal quality assurance reviews, and some examples are you may be doing an internal audit quality self-assessment under the IAA standards, which is really a best practice. And for banks regulated by the FRB and the OCC, so you have the SR 13.1, and you have reviews under the OCC heightened standards, and those are core activities of the QA function. And then moving on to professional practices. We're developing the audit manual methodology and supporting methodology documents that may not reside in the manual, looking at and providing guidance for the execution of the periodic risk assessment, supporting the audit universe development, and having methodology support for that. Very often, this group will be involved with setting internal audit personnel goals for the year, post-audit surveys, developing that survey, which audit will then execute. A big part of what professional practices is doing is gathering metrics through measurement, and then providing analysis, and then through that insights to the CAE, to the board, and that's really critical. Process improvement is the most important aspect of what professional practices is supporting. And then, of course, making sure that audit committee reporting is accurate, and it gives the right information that the audit committee needs to oversee the audit function. Audit software implementation is a key one, making sure that the audit department has the tools that it needs to execute on its work, to interact together as auditors, to eventually archive the work that we're doing in case so that we can call upon those work papers later, and third parties can come look at them as needed. Skills assessment is really key, and training is very, very important. That's a key aspect of what professional practices does. It's all about upskilling, and that's providing the continuous improvement that we're talking about. We're up to our next poll question, and here we are. So you could feel free to answer those. Answer this question. Jeff, as we're waiting, are there any questions coming in?
Actually, yes, sorry, I couldn't get my mute off. Yeah, so there is, Joe. We have an observation here that there's a struggle, a challenge, if you will, to get management to allocate enough resources to really focus on this and address it effectively when management has so many other competing needs from a resource perspective. Can you comment on how an internal audit group within an organization might express the need to management in a way that would help get resources allocated to this to get it addressed most effectively?
That's a really good question. I think, all audit departments and CAEs have to face that challenge in one way or another, because resources are limited in every organization, and whether resources are sort of static or there are cuts coming or that sort of thing. That's a challenge that CAEs have. And so, I think the easy answer, maybe the lazy answer, is to just pick up the standards and say, we have these new standards, they govern what we do as auditors, and we have to adhere to them. That is true. That's all true. But at the same time, we want to talk about why, what we get as an organization. So, the first part is we certainly can say that we comply with IA standards, and that's really important. That is a badge that we want to hold up. The other thing is really talking, and this is really the crux of what we're getting at. It's value that we can drive beyond compliance. So you have an internal audit function. It exists, and we have our resources and there are costs to it, and it's an investment. What are we getting out of it? So through enhancing the performance and deliverables of our department, we just get more with what we have. And so that's why it's a really good question. And hopefully, folks will see, and the boards will see, that through this kind of continuous improvement cycle, the organization is getting the most value that it can out of its audit function.
And just to add to that, Joe, I think that one of the things we've seen some clients do is try to talk about this in the context of risk. It's hard to break it down into dollars and cents in terms of when it's budget time, but you can talk about what are the risks in your organization and how does effectively addressing an internal audit program address those risks? How much risk mitigation are you going to accomplish through effective deployment and compliance with these standards? That's a conversation that sometimes can be a little bit more effective resonating with management when you can articulate the risks versus how you can mitigate those risks through effective addressing of these standards.
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
And Joe, on the survey, we have 93% who answered all of the above.
Nice. Okay. Terrific. Right on. And moving right along. Let's talk about the continuous improvement cycle and what it means for you, for your audit department, for your organization. So it's really, as we talked about, it's an iterative improvement process, but how does it work in action? So, when we looked at that pictorial with the circles, we focused on quality assurance, which is really the catalyst for continuous improvement. So QA activities, when we looked at the QA universe, including internal and external QA reviews, the ongoing monitoring, periodic assessments, these generate valuable insights into the efficiency and effectiveness of the audit processes that auditors are doing. These activities identify areas of strength and further uncover opportunities for enhancement, providing actionable recommendations tailored to the unique needs of the audit function. So, for example, if there are recurring observations from QA reviews, that highlight, they may highlight the need for enhanced stakeholder communication practices. And that would be an important takeaway from QA reviews. Professional practices is all about creating and refining standards and methodologies. So, it's about transforming insights from QA activities into practical, actionable enhancements to audit policies, methodologies, and skill sets of auditors. This includes updating the audit manual, optimizing risk-based audit planning, and refining training programs. So by embedding QA findings into these foundational elements, professional practices ensure that lessons learned are integrated, driving consistent improvement across the audit function. The positive feedback loop in action. So the interaction between QA activities and professional practices creates what I call a virtuous growth cycle of learning, adaptation, and enhancement. So, for example, the following. Talk about a QA activity. A QA review of a recent audit identifies improvement opportunities in audit reporting, such as there may be ambiguous language, which can happen in audit reports, or delayed issuance. That's also something we face often. So professional practices response may be that the audit manual is updated to standardize reporting templates and timelines, and training is provided to auditors on the new guidance. And then the next step is auditors taking that back, and then there's audit improvement through the audit team communicating issues in a more timely and effective way. And as a result, deliverables and stakeholder satisfaction improve. Talk about metrics, which are important to all of us. So continuous improvement relies on robust metrics and stakeholder engagement to measure progress and validate the effectiveness of implemented changes. Key performance indicators such as audit cycle time, stakeholder satisfaction, and compliance with standards provide a clear picture of the audit function's trajectory. Post-audit surveys and feedback loops with the audit committee and management further enhance this process by capturing real-time insights that can be fed back into QA and professional practices activities. And we're talking about next, achieving long-term organizational value. That's what all these efforts are aiming towards. So the positive feedback loop between the audit team, QA, and professional practices not only enhances the internal audit function, but also contributes to the organization's broader objectives. Sorry. A continuously improving audit department strengthens risk management, Jeff, as you mentioned. It ensures compliance and provides strategic insights, positioning the IA function as a trusted advisor and value creator. So by fostering a culture of continuous improvement through this positive feedback loop, organizations can transform their internal audit functions into resilient, forward-thinking teams capable of addressing both current and future challenges. We're up to our third poll question.
So, Joe, we have a question here, and it really is kind of looking for maybe a high-level summary of what are the key challenges or things to keep in mind when planning for your AQA?
Oh, I'm really glad someone raised that, because there's some important things that are so fundamental, but we have to plan for them. And if we forget them, it could be a challenge for us, certainly. So one area to focus on is internal audit is always about show me, in a sense. It's trust but verify. And so as auditors, that's our stance, and that's our motto. And when we're audited, it's the same. So if we're having a review of what we do as auditors, evidence of conformance is really important. That's built into the standards. And by that, we mean documentation. And for various aspects of the standards, there are different examples of different types of documentation that would be appropriate, or there may be some specific to your organization. But that is really key. I think another thing to think about is, the EQA could be challenging for the organization as a whole, not just audit. It could be disruptive, possibly, if it's not sort of planned or managed in the right way. So communication is really, really important. So early and ongoing communication with the board, communicating, I would say, broadly within your organization, all your partners across management, and within your audit team. I mean, it's really a great challenge and learning opportunity for your audit team to be a part of this, and also to know it's happening, to know it will take some time. If it's planned for the future, you may have enhanced your methodology, and now you're executing under a new methodology, and you know that a year down the road, you'll be having your external quality assessment, and you may have done a gap assessment to identify certain things you can fix. you have a plan for doing it, and you get your whole audit department on board to be executing under the new methodology or enhanced methodology over the, let's say, next year. And you'll have your EQA a year down the road, reviewing a much stronger audit function and deliverables that can demonstrate adherence to the standards and beyond.
Excellent. I think we have all the responses in on the poll, and we have 3 answers that kind of came out in almost a tie.
Yeah.
IA members spend some of their time, they outsource to address these things, and then the third one is that they don't currently address these in any formal manner.
So there are different ways of tackling this, for sure. And, there could be, the right answer for your organization. There could be the way you've done things historically. And, after, considering some of, what we're talking about, you may consider a different approach. So between A, B, and C, these are different approaches to both adherence and also driving increased value. And I think the first question really pointed to some of this as well. For some organizations, we're not really focused on this yet, and you can use the new standards as a springboard, or the improved standards as a springboard for formally building QA into your audit department. And it could be just a catalyst for really positive change. Talked about some kind of very specific aspects of quality assurance and professional practices. Now I'd like to talk about the program in its sort of full scope. So let's talk about the full scope of your quality assurance and improvement program. QAIP for short. We've outlined them thematically, and then we'll get into some detail. And these are activities and efforts that help your IA department both comply with IAA GIAS, or Global Internal Audit Standards, but also, and more importantly, to achieve positive growth beyond compliance. So we have the list here. I won't read it at this point, and we'll go through each of these in some detail. So quality assessments, and let's talk about the periodic ones. As we're talking about, the requirement is to have a periodic assessment every 5 years at least. For some organizations, it's going to be more frequent, and that may be you have a new CAE, you may have a new board audit chair, you may have changed aspects of your department. Maybe you have been fully outsourced and now you're bringing people in internally, or you're going in the opposite direction. You're bringing more outsourced personnel. For whatever reason, you may want to accelerate your next external quality assessment. We'll talk about these different options. We've talked about them, but we'll talk about them in some depth here. So again, you have the readiness review, which is your gap assessment. I want to know where I am now, and maybe I'll do my external assessment, full external assessment, in a year, 18 months. Give me time to fix some things that I feel may need to be addressed. You typically bring in an outside resource, a CIA, to help you with this. You could do it internally, but you probably want an outside view. It's probably, where you think there may be something to fix, and you want that kind of expert advice as to what you need to address. Your external assessment, this is your kind of typical external quality assurance review to help you verify that your IA functions is conforming with the standards, it's aligned with organizational governance, and then further is contributing to achieving organizational objectives and stakeholder expectations. And then your sort of modified approach is the self-assessment with independent validation. So your internal audit personnel perform a thorough documented internal review to determine conformance with the standards. And then qualified assessors, meaning the CIA, will come in and determine that the review was conducted completely and accurately. And we'll look at a slide later that will sort of like line up these services and what aspects each one covers. I just want to say briefly, the minimum requirement is to have an external assessment every 5 years. Once in 10 years. So one of those can be a self-assessment with independent validation, and that will help you to completely comply with the standards. But they would not, you wouldn't have 2 in 10 years being self-assessments. And moving on. Internal quality assurance reviews. So we talked about the periodic ones that are external. These are what you do every day to improve, to assess and improve what you do within your audit department. So it's ongoing monitoring. Regular real-time monitoring of internal audit engagements. We talked about HART reviews or work paper reviews to ensure adherence to internal standards, methodology, and regulatory requirements. And these are regular self-assessments. They could be quarterly, it could be twice a year, hopefully something like that. Some of them are annually. These are structured evaluations to conduct that would verify audit processes aligned with industry standards and objectives. Now, really key to all of this is stakeholder feedback and engagement. And we have so many stakeholders as auditors. We have the audit committee providing oversight and management as well. So audit committee and executive feedback, regular collection of feedback from key stakeholders, the audit committee, executives, department heads on the performance, relevance, and effectiveness of the internal audit function. And client surveys help support this. So generally post-audit surveys for audited entities to gather insights on the quality, relevance, and value of the audit process and outcomes. I think it's a given that after every audit, we as auditors should take the time to send a formal survey, several questions to management of the area that we spent time in, and ask them for their feedback on how well we did in terms of, the work that we did and the reporting that we did. Documentation reporting standards. So the QA function would regularly assess audit files to ensure they're complete, accurate, and that they comply with documentation standards, particularly your own methodology. And reporting to verify that audit findings and audit reports are presented clearly, consistently, and in alignment with your department's established standards. Training and competency, and this supports really the quality assurance, professional practices, continuous improvement cycle that we talked about. So skills assessment is really, really important. It's a requirement. Periodic evaluation of auditor skills and knowledge, identifying areas for further training or development to enhance audit quality. So an easy way to do this is to have auditors self-assess their knowledge and skills. All auditors will maybe feed into, for example, a Google Sheets file. And then you can see across the department, here are areas of strengths, here are skills, knowledge across the organization. Well, maybe I know that I have an AML audit coming up. I can assess now whether anyone is kind of saying that they have the skills to be able to execute that, or whether I may need outside help to be able to cover that. And that's sort of your auditor's self-identifying and self-assessing skills, which is a basis for this step. And then throughout reviewing audits, whether it's an audit supervisor reviewing work papers, or whether it's QA reviewing audit work that was done, professional practices, sort of having their ear to the ground, further assessing auditor skills and identifying areas for enhancement, and then providing continuous learning, ongoing education and training to ensure that auditors remain informed on the latest industry standards, trends, and tools. Methodology and process optimization. So here we're talking about or standardization of the audit process, developing and refining standard operating procedures or methodology to streamline audit processes, reducing variability and enhancing quality. and tools and technology integration, evaluating and implementing audit management tools and data analytics to increase audit efficiency, accuracy, and the depth of analysis that you can achieve. Risk-based audit planning and engagement level risk assessment. So in terms of your annual audit planning or ongoing audit planning, aligning the audit plan with the organization's risk profile and strategic priorities to ensure that audits focused on the most critical risk areas. And then at an audit engagement level, tailoring each audit's engagement scope and objectives to address the specific risks associated with each audit area. And that's supported, of course, by methodology, by ongoing QA and auditors executing according to enhanced standards. And then quality reporting and continuous improvement. So QA metrics, tracking and reporting on key QA metrics such as audit cycle time, for example, report quality, stakeholder satisfaction, and compliance with audit standards. These are requirements. They're spelled out in the Global Internal Audit Standards, and these are just examples of metrics that may be useful to your organization. Root cause analysis. If you have recurring review findings or process inefficiencies, looking at, well, if I'm seeing a theme or a trend, what's the root cause here and how can I address that? So it's not just audit by audit, but it's looking at the audit results sort of as a whole. And action plan follow-up. So coming out of any audit, if you have findings, then you'd have action plans to address those findings. Monitoring and validating that IE management's corrective actions are effective and sustainable, ensuring accountability and continuous improvement. This is where we as auditors are audited, whether we audit ourselves or through an external review. We have things that need to be addressed. There are things to be fixed. If we do a good review, we're going to find things to address. And so we look at the themes and we look at root causes. And then we can say, okay, if this is what's causing the issue, if I address that, and have an action plan to address an issue and have a plan and execute on it, we'll be able to have a stronger audit function. It's the same thing we do with our stakeholders in our audits. And here we're just taking that same approach and improving audit through that process. We'll talk in a little bit of depth, we'll look at a couple tables that sort of pull in the various bits and pieces we talked about and see how they fit together. And if you're seeing these, hopefully seeing it laid out in the way we'll look at will help you to kind of envision, what may be an approach for you, looking at your existing QA and professional practices functions within your audit teams. And maybe if you're thinking about improvement and, more value-driven growth. So here we've talked about the different types of periodic quality assessments. So, we talked about in our first row, second row from the left, the readiness review. Then we have our independent validation of a self-assessment, and then our full external assessment. And then going down these rows, we just sort of compare and contrast these different types of reviews. So first of all, looking at a readiness review, internal audit resources within the department are typically assisting, and it's typically performed by outside personnel. Whereas when you do your independent validation, primarily it's your own people who are doing that, and then you have a CIA to come in and look at the results and independently validate the conclusions. And then with your external assessment, your internal resources are secondary in your internal resources are supporting the external folks, the CIA, who will come in and really lead that assessment. In terms of duration, again, it's going to be different for every department, but if one were to generalize, a readiness review you'd probably execute in about a week. If an independent validation, again, depending on the size of the department, it's usually 1 to 2 weeks. For the external assessor to do the validation. And then for an external assessment, you would probably have that assessor be involved over the course of 3 weeks. Not necessarily camped out in your department. It's not a full-on audit of you. It's simply that, that would be the duration of the review. They would share requirements that they would need, documents and things like that, and have some meetings at various milestones and touch points, and then be able to report out results 3 weeks after beginning. And then we talk about various aspects of a review, examining governance documents and methodology. This is done across all of these types of reviews. With the independent validation, your folks do that. With the external assessment, the outside assessor does it. Same with reviewing sample work papers, and same with conducting stakeholder interviews. With an independent validation, your folks do that. With the external assessment, the outside person does it. But to point out here, with a readiness review, because of the duration, you're probably not doing detailed testing of sample work papers. You're probably not doing a stakeholder interviews. You certainly can. But you're probably doing a readiness review and bringing in, an outside expert to help you to do more of a quick assessment. Here's some things to fix. Let's come back in a year, and you'll hopefully have a stronger and better documented, audit results at that point. In terms of recommending, validating, determining enhancements, different ways of looking at the same thing, readiness review will recommend those, certainly. The independent validator will validate those. Enhancements that your own folks have come up with, and the external assessor will, personally determine enhancements. These all address conformance with IA standards, alignment with organizational governance, and very importantly, the contribution to achieving organizational objectives. In terms of benchmarking, which is really key, probably the readiness review would not necessarily do that. Both the independent validation and external assessment will. For the independent validation, your own folks will do that. And with the external assessment, your outside CIA will do the benchmarking, recommend enhancements, same thing, and suggesting leading practices. Again, both critical aspects of the review. Your readiness review will certainly have recommendations for enhancements. It probably will not sort of take the time to, at that point, it may not be done in the depth needed to suggest leading practices, but that can be an aspect of something you'd want to include. But again, you'll see the difference here between who does the work, between an independent validation or an external assessment. I have another slide which goes into the more holistic, ongoing quality assurance and professional practices benefits that an organization may want to achieve. Here we're looking at just your periodic assessment. In this slide, we're looking at, okay, going forward. So we have our periodic assessment maybe every 5 years. Maybe if we accelerated, we could have it once in 3 years for various needs or reasons. But this is, looking at what we do every day as auditors on an ongoing basis. So, there's no hard and fast way to kind of differentiate, but one way to look at it is, let's say you have, in the second field from the left, you have a QA lead. That's like your basic QA function. You may have your QA and professional practices leads or lead. And you may have your kind of like full QA professional practices function, and it could be fully outsourced. And if this were the case, what would service providers provide here, or internally? What would your internal groups maybe be executing and perhaps needing help with? So certainly all these solutions address review of audits, whether they're full scope audits, kind of your targeted audits, your special projects, advisory engagements that management may ask you to do, increasingly so, like an implementation, go live, readiness review, something along those lines. Your issue validation, and it's bread and butter of what we do as auditors, and your QA and professional practices, folks and functions will address the quality and methodology that issues are validated under. Retrospective reviews, as we talked about, periodic risk assessments and continuous auditing. So two aspects that really underlie the audit function. We are doing, most audit functions strive to do risk-based audits. And to achieve that, we have to assess our risk. We want to, on a continuous basis, make sure that we are in touch with the risks across the organization and update those as needed. And that's done through continuous auditing. That's those functions that we talked about, your QA lead or basic QA function, in-house or outsourced, certainly will address those. If you need a broader solution and you need help with professional practices, so certainly audit universe development and coverage, making sure that it is risk-based and is supported by risk assessments, that's covered. Audit committee reporting, making sure it's accurate, but more to the point, gives the audit committee the information it needs to provide oversight of the audit function. And then audit manual and methodology development and enhancements. And then when we go further to the right, if we're talking about outsourcing, or if you have the luxury of having all of this in-house, most of you may look towards enhancing the resources that you have through some outside help. So if we're looking at your, kind of like full continuous improvement cycle, quality assurance and professional practices efforts, again, it's going to certainly involve your ongoing and annual quality self-assessments under the IAA standards. If you are a bank and you're subject to FRB and OCC requirements, there are those specific annual assessments that an audit department will do. And QA and professional practices functions are certainly a part of them, of those reviews, and an outsource expert will help you with that. Regulatory requests would be covered, and Sarbanes-Oxley testing, if you're doing that, looking at how well you're doing it and optimizing, looking at the controls you're testing, looking at where those controls are tested. Are they being tested both in SOX reviews and IA reviews, trying to eliminate any duplication for better efficiency. And we're up to our last poll question here.
Thanks, Joe. While people are responding to the question, we're basically at the end of our time, but we did have one other question that came in, and it says, are there particular aspects of IIA requirements which you would like to highlight?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's an important point, because the Global Internal Audit Standards sort of reorganized and enhanced the existing standards. But there's a critical aspect under the IAA professional practices framework that is called topical requirements. And this is something new that we all have to keep an eye out for. These topical requirements, as they sound, they're mandatory for consideration and or implementation. The first one that we have came out in February this year, covers cybersecurity, and it will be effective February next year. So that's important to look at and see, is our methodology aligned towards that, towards addressing cybersecurity risk. The second one came out already, and it's in draft form. It addresses third-party risk, which is critical for many organizations. Right now, it's in draft form in the comment stage. Once it's finalized, it will be effective a year from that date. So topical requirements are sort of a developing aspect to the professional practices framework. So we constantly need to be aware of those as they come out, and consider them for applicability to our organizations and to our audits. It's a very good question. Thank you.
So on this, as a final comment here in our last minute, the survey, the most common answer is that people would like to talk more before deciding. I'd like to invite folks to reach out to Joe or I if you want to talk about how this applies specifically to your organization and your situation. I think the readiness review is a nice element to this, because it gives you permission to acknowledge that you're not all the way there yet, as a first step. And we'd be happy to talk to you about how to get started or just how to think about these things. Thanks so much for attending. Any other final words, Joe?
No, I appreciate it. Again, just following up and echoing what you mentioned. Happy to talk to folks, and we can meet with you. Just let us know. We'll talk about if there's a solution that can help you with the new requirements, and of course, holistically with driving value in your organization through quality assurance and professional practices within internal audit.
That's the end of our session. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.